Welcome to the Jewish People's Court. David Korshak and Lori Feld, both in their mid-20s, come to the Beit Din, the Jewish People's Court, today as co-plaintiffs in the case of the unmarried couple. David and Lori live together in this city and want to belong to their congregation, to the congregation in the community, Congregation Am Yisrael. Both having grown up in synagogue life, they feel that they want to be part of it now as young adults. However, the congregation has said that they cannot have a membership as if they were a married couple because, in fact, they have not yet been married. David and Lori say that that's only a question of time and that it would be of substantial greater expense for them to hold individual members and memberships in the congregation. Sitting to decide this case on the Beit Din today are Rabbi Peter Noble Dayan, Rabbi Harvey Well Dayan, and Rabbi Mordecai Simon of Beit Din, the case of the unmarried couple.
Will the co-plaintiffs David Korshak and Lori Feld and the defendant Mr. Stephen Berger, membership chairman of Congregation Am Yisrael, please step forward?
Shalom. David and Lori, you have brought charges against the congregation to the effect that membership in that congregation has been denied to you because of your current lifestyle. Would you like to elaborate or clarify that?
Certainly. Lori and I are both 26 years old. We've been living together since we graduated college. At this time, Lori is working in sales and I'm finishing up law school. We no longer live near the synagogues in which we grew up in, and at this time would like to join a temple which we feel that we could be part of the community and become an active member in the congregation. We applied for membership at Am Yisrael and were informed that we couldn't join as a couple, but only as individual members at substantially greater cost.
Mr. Berger, would you react to that in as much as I assume the congregation has received the application for a couple's membership in your congregation and you have reacted negatively at this point?
Yes, Rabbi. It's the feeling of our board that we must enforce and respect the sanctity of marriage. It's the foundation of our faith, the foundation of our synagogue, and we cannot condone a relationship such as theirs without marriage. Consequently, we have turned down their application for a couple's membership.
Lori, could you explain to us what your objection would be if the congregation were to make it financially feasible for you to join as singles?
If the congregation would make it possible that we could join as singles with it not costing us more than if we joined as a family, that would be very nice. It would not solve the issue, though. There is more to it than that. We are hesitant to be married right now because of personal reasons and backgrounds of our families. And there's also another issue that we feel that we will be categorized as a certain bad couple. And we have friends that are members of the congregation, and we feel we are outcasts right now. We feel this should be a place where we should be warmly welcomed and we could be an asset to the congregation. And we're not getting that feeling at all.
Well, Lori, do I understand, though, that primarily your case before this particular Beit Din revolves around the financial consideration in terms of membership in the congregation?
That is an issue, but it would not solve everything.
But is that the
for us.
primary issue as far as you're concerned?
No, because if it was taken care of, then the other issue would still be there. It's not the primary issue.
But Mr. Berger, do you feel that the issue, as Lori just presented it, is really the main issue, or have you given your verdict, that is, the membership committee of the congregation, based on the standards, rules, and regulations, bylaws of the congregation, that this would be a violation thereof if you were to accede to their request?
Rabbi, we simply feel we cannot encourage that kind of relationship by giving it our stamp of approval by allowing these young people a couple's membership. membership under some other basis might well be encouraged. However, a couple's membership just is not in what we feel the best interests of our congregation because of its endorsement of their current lifestyle.
Have you ever presented this to Laurie and to David? And if so, that is a single membership, both of you members, but on a single basis. And if so, what would your, David, what would your reaction be? Would you accept this opportunity?
Well, as this hasn't been presented to us yet, we can't really give you a firm answer off the top of our heads. I'd only like to echo what Laurie said, and that's that the financial aspect really just takes care of part of the problem. As we all know, the Jewish religion has never made a practice of making people unwelcome in a synagogue, and we feel that even if we were given the okay financially, we would be deemed as outcasts or special people in the synagogue, people that have gone before the membership board and not really received the stamp of approval.
Okay, well, I will now ask my colleagues to join me as we retire to consider the merits of the case and judge one way or the other, or perhaps come out with some other solution that might be acceptable to both parties. Thank you, and we will return with our verdict in just a moment.
We now join the Dayanim as they deliberate the case of the unmarried couple.
I think the issues of this particular case are it's not denying membership in the congregation to two young people who want to be members of the congregation, although they looked upon it from that point of view. But I think what we have to understand is the Jewish concept of kiddushin, of the need for sanctity of the joining together, the living together of two people. And consequently, that ought to be the direction in which we ought to encourage the young people to react at the same time, to make them understand the role that the synagogue cannot change its standards or alter the standards of traditions of Judaism, of saying, therefore, it's all right, anything you want to do, when you want to do it, is fine within the spheres of our tradition. And I think that was part of the issue.
Well, the question has been asked before, and there are at least two responsa that I found that have been written, which ruled specifically that a congregation had to uphold the notion that a family membership was for people who were married, but that in every case they should encourage the young people to join the congregation as individuals and to encourage them to partake in the rites of a Jewish marriage and to be members of the congregation eventually on that basis.
I don't think any congregation would deny membership to anyone who says, I want to be a member of your congregation.
I think the congregation should be encouraged, on the other hand, to make it financially feasible. That seems to be an issue. It may not be the most important issue for the couple or the congregation, but it seems to be an underlying theme. They feel in some sense they're being discriminated against economically as well as on the basis of their lifestyle.
I think the chairman of the membership committee indicated a feeling of willing to negotiate to that point. And I think perhaps if we could encourage this entree to membership, that these young people not only would enter into the congregation, but also would consider entering into the tradition of kiddushin, of valid, recognized marriage.
The rabbis return to announce their decision.
David, Laurie, Mr. Berger, we have taken into consideration the presentation of your requests. You must, of course, understand that in accordance with Jewish law, there's no aspect thereof which would recognize or give encouragement to the status of individuals living together out of wedlock. The very aspect of marriage is known in our Jewish tradition as kiddushin, the word kadosh, which means holy, sanctified, something very, very special. Therefore, perhaps that would be the thrust to the two of you, to involve yourself in the recognized act of Kiddushin in the manner prescribed by our tradition. We do commend you for wanting to be part of the community. A congregation has a threefold purpose, and perhaps in today's day even more than that, but certainly as a Beis Medrash, a place of study, a Beit Knesset, an assembly house, and a Beit Tefillah, place of prayer. You've indicated because of the associations, both of you grew up in a tradition, that you want to continue that aspect thereof. In the congregation, in this case, Shalom, which is closest to you, and Mr. Berger, we hope that you will be able to work out the details, perhaps the three of you, to invite Lori and David to be members at this immediate state on the basis of individual membership, commensurate with their ability to meet the financial requirements, and hopefully soon they will be in a position to indeed take the advantage of the opportunities which that congregation offers to couples, young couples, new couples, and they will infuse their activity and lifeblood into the congregation and perhaps be in the position that you are of serving others who come to them. To all, we hope that this will involve all of you together in strengthening our Jewish community and responsibilities one to another.
And so in the case of the unmarried couple, the Beit Din has encouraged David and Lori to prepare for marriage as soon as possible and to make Kiddushin a part of their lives, while at the same time asking the congregation to consider the fact that these are young people who have come to the synagogue in order to be a part of the community and to do whatever they can to make it possible for them to, in fact, actively participate as full and honored members of the congregation. Kiddushin important, the congregation's responsibility likewise, as we saw in this session of the Jewish People's Court.
Now a special Beit Din segment, the history of the Beit Din.
Gentlemen, the origin of the Beit Din goes back to the Torah and to Moshe Rabbeinu himself, who was our first judge. He divided the people into groups and handled the cases in that way. Rabbi Simon, would you like to tell us a little bit more about how the courts developed?
Well, it's interesting that Moses tried to handle all of the people. Every case came to him, and it was obviously physically, humanly impossible. It was his father-in-law, a non-Jew, Jethro, who told him this is impossible. You have to divide the people, the cases in accordance with their importance, and he set up a system of judges. Ultimately, that 70 elders were selected representing all of the tribes, and they were to adjudicate the most difficult cases, and then the most important or difficult would Moses, and he would consult with the divine spirit for decisions. But on a more practical, as time went on, a more practical basis, the courts were divided in numbers and would handle the cases in accordance with importance. And they went anywhere from the Sanhedrin to a Beth Din of 3 persons.
Rabbi Well, would you tell us a little bit about the courts in the Mishnaic and the Talmudic period?
Well, as Rabbi Simon began to allude to, as the first Mishnah in Sanhedrin elaborates, there was a system of courts that was spread out throughout the entire land, and you found courts of 3 that were located in principal cities throughout the country. Obviously, we're talking about Israel at this particular moment. And you had the main court of the Sanhedrin of 70 that was located in Jerusalem. And the courts, depending on the size of the court, would listen to various types of cases depending on the severity of the case. It's interesting to note, as I was saying in private conversation, that the Sanhedrin was next to the Beit HaMikdash itself, to the Holy Temple, which meshed the two together in terms of importance.
Thank you very much.
Sitting on the Beit Din, the Jewish People's Court in this case, are Rabbi Peter Noble Dayan, Rabbi Mordecai Simon Dayan, and Rabbi Harvey Well of Beit Din. In this case, the case of the censored editor, Beverly Gold, who has served as the newsletter editor of her congregation, Beth Reuben, is coming to the court because she's been relieved of her duties after writing an especially scathing article about Israel as part of her regular monthly editorial. The congregational president, Sam Myers, representing the congregation, has relieved Beverly of her duties because the congregation feels that this editorial has gone beyond the pale. The case of the censored editor.
Will the plaintiff, Beverly Gold, and the defendant Sam Myers, president of the congregation Beth Rubin, please step forward.
Welcome to this session of the Beit-Din. Mrs. Gold, I understand that you have a complaint to lodge against your congregation. Could we please hear the complaint?
Yes, I've been a volunteer at my congregation, Beth Rubin, for the last 10 years, and I've been editor of our newsletter. With that came an opportunity to write editorial comments monthly, which I have been doing freely, and with some comments, both pro and con, to the nature. This time, I chose to write about the Israeli involvement, or let us say the Phalangist movement into the Lebanon situation and their part of it. And the board has dismissed me for this. They felt, from what they told me, that this was certainly not in keeping with the rules of the congregation. I have written other articles. I've criticized our own government for certain intervention in the Central American crises and the Soviet problem with the refuseniks, and I've never received such a scolding as I did with this particular article. And I wanted the Beit-Din to intervene in my behalf because I was dismissed.
Mr. Myers, you're the president of the congregation?
Yes.
And how would you answer the charges of Mrs. Gold?
Well, first of all, Beverly didn't say there was a vote of the temple board on the issue of dismissal. And although we were deadlocked, there was a vote, and the vote was that she should be dismissed. So I didn't tell her on my own. But the issue is this. This is a congregation which is not easily offended by controversy. It's a congregation which has invited a Communist Party member from the Israeli Knesset to speak to it. Shalom Akshav has spoken to this congregation. The Israelis for Israel-Palestine peace have been there. It's a congregation that's very sophisticated. The article that Beverly wrote went far beyond that, drew conclusions which were not substantiated, in fact, was inaccurate. We asked her to correct it, and she stood by it and said that this is her opinion. And we felt that this is inappropriate, it wasn't true, and for that reason, because of her position, we released her from service.
Could you clarify for the court and the Beit-Din exactly what you meant by your request for her to correct it?
Well, we felt that it was based on her emotion or her feeling about the situation. And some confusion crept into the article about who was responsible, for instance, in Sabra and Shatila. The Israelis were not responsible. It was done by the Phalangists. In her article, the implication was that somehow we were collusive with them.
Just ask you one
Yes.
other question. Would a simple statement on her behalf that this was her opinion and she was stating only her opinion, would that have been accepted by the board?
No. It was clear that she had thought about it and spoken it out based on, I don't know what, but it was very clear that that would not be sufficient for the board. No.
Could I ask, Mrs. Gold, were you ever given a hearing by the temple board?
Yes, and at that time, they called me because there was some deadlock, as Mr. Myers said, as to whether I had overstepped the bounds. And I told them that I had lived in Israel. I have friends still living there. I was reporting what had been written to me by my friends. I had some firsthand knowledge. I was not speaking from maybes and ifs, ands, or buts. There was definite pro and con right in the state of Israel itself.
You have a section in the bulletin that might be letters to the editor.
Well,
wherever
it's
there's
notes-
people. Has
yeah.
it ever been used? 10
no, we
years
ha-
you've been doing this.
That's right. That's right. We have, my column is strictly notes from the editor. My editorial opinion on what's going on in the world or the community, something that I think will be of interest to the congregation, to cause a, perhaps a dialogue at some future meeting.
As a volunteer, would you be subject to quick dismissal on the action of the board?
Evidently, they thought so.
It's not entirely volunteer. There is some pay involved.
Well, it's a
small stipend.
Yes, a small stipend.
To cover expenses.
It covers my expenses.
Mr.
yeah.
Myers, very briefly, can you tell us what you think the function of the bulletin of your congregation is?
Well, certainly to inform the congregants of congregational activities, but in our congregation, it is also sometimes to touch on these kinds of issues, although they are generally dealt with from the pulpit. But we have no objection to the expression of opinion. As I say, it's a very open and a very sophisticated congregation. The issue is that this went beyond that. This mirrored what the papers were saying. This was like the worst things that one can say about the situation, not knowing the truth of it.
We thank you both for being here, and we will deliberate and come back with our decision.
Once again, the judges deliberate the issues.
Gentlemen, I found this a very interesting and an intricate case, and I can understand both the position of the plaintiff and the defendant in terms of coming before the Beis Din. What would be your reactions to either one of the presentations that were made?
Well, my predilection is toward Mrs. Gold, and who was the editor. I'm a strong believer in the necessity for offering criticism when we believe someone else has sinned, in line with Leviticus, which says, Hokeach tokiach et amitecha. And I think what she's doing is tochacha. And I think there's a good tradition for it, a good prophetic tradition for it, a good rabbinic tradition, and I think the congregation should be responsive. On the other hand, it seems to me that since the bulletin is a house organ, the board of the congregation does have a right to determine how it ought to be used, but I don't think those standards were ever set out for her.
On the other hand, yes, you have to show where one is wrong. That's responsibility. But then she was acting as a committee of one, and she signed her name to it. This is my opinion. This is what I'm saying. And then you have the injunction, Al tiyeh dan yachidi. You can't be the singular judge. And in the role of Israel, and we find that it's not only Israel, but in this issue it is, Al tadin et chavercho ad shetagil limkomo. How do you know how you would react under certain circumstances? From the distance, the safety of distance, of time, of circumstances, we might react in a different way. With foresight, hindsight, the foresight is difficult. Hindsight is easy.
Well, I think that there are two situations that we should consider in terms of this case. First of all, I do believe that had she been a paid employee of the congregation, then the congregation would have been liable. There was no hatra, there was no admonishment, there was no statement of expectations in terms of her particular situation. On the other hand, in our particular case, she happens to be a volunteer. And I think that that changes the situation somewhat in terms of her situation. On the other hand, I'm rather surprised that the congregation had not given any guidelines or set any kind of an editorial policy in terms of the position or the rights of an editor in this kind of a situation.
I think we're dealing here with a situation in which Israel has become the most sensitive issue. And it seems to me that previously she'd been able to say almost anything she wanted as long as she didn't touch the Israel issue, and now all of a sudden the Israel issue became very hot, and as a result they reacted very hotly. I think that we ought to recommend that they try to repair their relationship. You have a very loyal volunteer who was trying to take Jewish principles into consideration and has done so over a long period of time, and now has offended the congregation.
I think in both instances, both should be commended for their interest and their desire to rectify a situation that presents a point of view to an entire congregation.
Thank you.
The rabbis return to announce their decision.
Mrs. Gold, Mr. Myers, we thank you both for coming before the Beit Din, and we have considered your case and deliberated upon it. I think it's generally our agreement that the bulletin as such is an arm of the congregation, and that the board of directors or the board of trustees of the congregation have a right, therefore, to establish policy. It is equally correct to say that had your position been a paid position, had you been an employee of the congregation, then we certainly would have found on your behalf the halachic principle of ein onshin ela im kein mashirin, that one does not give out any punishment unless there's a warning. would have been prevalent in this particular situation, and justice would have been with you. In this case, however, since you were not an employee, but you were basically a volunteer for the congregation, the board, as the Gaboyim, the trustees of the congregation, have that right to establish policy. However, we also feel that for all of these years you were allowed to function as the editor of the bulletin without censorship or without interference, that perhaps the congregation was remiss in this particular case for excusing you from that position so hastily. And we would encourage you both to go back to the congregation, for the congregation, its board of directors, to again consider you for the position of editor, but to establish firm guidelines so that such misunderstandings will not occur in the future. Again, we thank you very much.
In the case of the censored editor, then, the Beit Din, and in this case the opinion delivered by Rabbi Well as Av Beit Din, has responded by saying that the congregation should reconsider their decision, should reconsider their action in dismissing Beverly Gold as the editor of the Congregational Bulletin. Beverly Gold was told that in this situation, had she been a paid employee of the congregation, that the Beit Din would have found in her favor as a person who had not been given fair warning and had not been given fair opportunity to consider her actions. Since she is a volunteer, the congregation, however, does have a right to dismiss her should they so choose. In fact, the congregation has a right in this case, or more accurately, a responsibility perhaps, as outlined by the rabbis of the Beit Din, to consider providing her with good guidance and clear guidance. Whether they change their opinion in the case of Beverly Gold or not, Congregation Beth Reuben is going to be required by the Beit Din to make sure that whoever assumes this responsibility on behalf of the congregation has clear and firm guidelines so that they have some sense of the will of the congregation and the directions and the limits to which they are exposed. Therefore, in the case of the censored editor, the Beit Din has found in favor of the congregation.